This is great. This is global outreach. We're in San Diego on the Pacific Coast.
It's always good to practice the playbook because you never really know what the individual or team members are going to react when they're in the middle of a crisis.
What do you see as the main problem with learning and development as it stands today?
That's how you have better play and memory, is by making sure that you're also being stimulated more than just sitting at a table.
If you're actually working in security and you make a mistake, that's going to have horrific consequences. Everyone has to be achieving something. Everyone has to be actively seeing their improvement. Otherwise, it's not so much a game as just an incredibly frustrating hobby that people will give up.
Oh, I applaud that. That is so needed.
We are very pleased to be welcomed by Chloé Messdaghi and James Bore, both experts in their own right and directors of PlaySecure. PlaySecure is a conference and, dare I say, an initiative, a movement to enable better learning and development in security. It's a pleasure to have you on. Chloé, you are in California, so you're the closest representative we have there. Could you tell us a little bit about PlaySecure? Obviously, we know, but just for the audience.
Yeah, it's this conference that basically we bring everything together into a gamified space. It's probably like the only virtual conference in the past year or so where I feel like we're always interactive. Like there wasn't ever a moment we weren't interactive, but the whole purpose of the PlaySecure conference is to showcase the importance of play and how gamification works, especially when it comes to security. We need to be thinking how to upskill in a short period of time at all times. And also security has always been gamified in many ways. So that's why this conference is very important and why the PlaySecure conference is needed.
Indeed, and we had a great time. Lots of people from across the pond, across the world. But our founder James, welcome. Obviously, you're on my time zone as well, so thank you. Tell us a little bit about the initiative PlaySecure, what it's trying to achieve. You know, what's the difference between play, gamification, that sort of thing.
The idea behind it all came from actually a panel we did months before with Chloé then as well, talking about games in security and ways that you can play with ideas around security to give people a chance to learn. Chloé can talk about this much better than I can, but stress impairs learning. And so bringing some aspects of play into it means that people have a better chance to learn. They get this opportunity to develop and skill up in a consequence-free environment, or largely consequence-free. And it's just a better way to explore things and make mistakes without things going horribly wrong. So that was the whole aim of it. And then the conference came together off the back of that.
And so what's the problem we're trying to solve? Why is normal learning development not perhaps as effective? Why should we let our employees play, Chloé?
Well, if you want me to dive into cognitive science, I'm more than happy to. I'm obsessed with the brain. But I would say that the one thing that has been proven and shown over time with research is that the fastest way to learn something is through a gamified ecosystem. In other words, when we play a game, we're more likely to take in what we're learning because it's interactive usually. The reality is that, say, for example, all of us here right now, do you remember your textbooks in the 5th grade? Chances are you probably didn't, unless you have incredible picture memory. But the thing is that most of us don't, because not all of us can learn just by reading. We are very interactive. How we learn, the best pathways when we're visually stimulated, we're also hearing is stimulated, what we're seeing is stimulated, like everything that games do for us puts us into that simulation where all our senses are intertwined and allows us to have better memory in the end of what we learned, and then be able to apply it in a short relative time.
Okay, so then let's clarify a few things, because all throughout today we've been talking about talent shortage and upskilling, and yes, I mean, to be honest, communication skills upskilling, the only thing I can think of that might work is neurolinguistic programming, or just elocution. I don't know, but one thing we might be able to put our fingers down on is, what is the difference, maybe this for James, between gamification and play?
So gamification is a particular area or discipline which is about bringing game-like aspects into training or development. Often it's done extremely badly. It's just slapping a scoreboard onto a quiz, which is a very bad way to do it. But when it's done exceptionally well, when it's done properly, it does almost become not a game in the sense that most people understand it, like tic-tac-toe or Monopoly, but a game in the sense that it's something where you are gradually learning and challenged repeatedly. And as you develop, you're taking these half steps in difficulty upwards, rather than simply having to learn a whole block to do anything. You've got these small steps, you work your way up, and then by the end of it, you've really achieved something. So there's a whole field of gamification which is around that. Then the play aspect is something different again. That gets almost more philosophical, but it's much more about that consequence-free environment. And everyone learns best from mistakes, from making mistakes. If you're actually working in security and you make a mistake, that's going to have horrific consequences. So just bringing that environment where you can make those mistakes, you can see or imagine those consequences without having to suffer through them. You can still learn the same way. You learn not to make those errors, but no one gets hurt.
And that consequence-free learning is something that maybe people frown on. They say, oh, you can't make mistakes, but then everything is by the book, and then an asymmetric threat rocks up and there is no book. Chloé, then I'll be interested, what do you see as the main problem with learning and development as it stands today? Bearing in mind, all throughout this MSS San Diego forum, we've been going, learning and development, upskilling, and so on and so forth. So what's actually wrong with how we're doing it at the moment?
You mean on our whole hiring process and our promotions? Oh, happy to. One is we definitely have a diversity and inclusion problem. Hands down, I think our industry is probably one of the worst. I will be blunt to say that. The other thing that is, and how you can tell, by the way, is you can go and take any job opportunity that's posted. And there are gender coders online. You just check it, run through a gender coder and see what happens. It's always more male dominated. And the issue is that when we are dealing with history of this, is that usually we have whoever's in that position or who has had that seat before has the history of that background to have that seat. We're not thinking about the future of who can actually have that seat because we keep looking at the past on who should have that seat. And so what ends up happening is that gets reflected in our job posting. So it's going to be more geared towards, cisgender male that happens to be white, because that is how it's set up. And until that we as an industry can recognize that it's time that we share power and make sure that we're testing our own biases at all times and trying to be the better person that we can be, we're going to keep going into this routine. So in some ways, human biases are always going to exist. So there's ways how to go about this, which is in your hiring process, make it more about the person's ability and also understanding about why don't we test them instead? That's another way of doing it. It's not always about who has this cert or that cert, because that's been proven over and over that certs doesn't mean that you know these things. It gives you a good idea that you have this theory base, but it doesn't mean that you actually know it. I think the thing is that we always think about it is like, if we keep throwing these certs out there, the reality is, do you think any attackers have certs? I guarantee it, not really. And so because of that, in our hiring process, we keep putting all this emphasis on certs, on emphasis of not looking at our historic situation of lack of diversity and inclusion. And I think that's those are definitely the things. Now, how does play come into the situation is that if we want to upskill our team, if we want to test out applicants, this is going to give us a better idea of who should be in that seat. It takes away the human biases of what's on a resume and plugs it into real life situations where you test the person and their ability. And this is one of those things that why we did this event a long time called Women Unite Over CTF, was to showcase that we have the ability to do this type of work. We went even beyond what people would think was the average for these CTFs. And they went beyond that, but yet they still kept dealing with this hiring problem. So that's the thing, is like, we can use gamification in a way, or play, I like to use more because it's more a sense of belongingness, to actually change how our industry is hiring, and to really understand people and their abilities instead of judging it based on what's on a piece of paper.
Love it. And if it's good enough for the military do war games to see would these two militaries actually gel. I guess there's a lot of pushback in the industry, because maybe in the fields of HR they say, well, I'm an HR specialist and you're not. And anyway, let's not bash HR too much. They're too powerful. James, Chloe said, everyone could have a cert, but the attackers don't have a cert. Later in our next panel, when we talk about the technical architect of tomorrow, and earlier today at the beginning when we talked about the CISO of tomorrow, we sort of alluded to the fact that it's probably unfair to ask the CISO to have technical skills anymore. Otherwise, they're a unicorn. And it's unfair because they have technical skills valid 5 years ago. And it's not that the skills are different so much as, unless it's like Dr. Almasan with the ML thing we were just talking about, but it's that they can't remain up to date. And so I'd be interested to see where play fills into that, because certainly a lot of people are intimidated by capture the flags unless they know what they're doing. And in fact, they'd be pleasantly surprised that a lot of capture the flags have very easy chunks that you can do as a beginner.
Firstly, I'm going to say that I would genuinely have concerns, not about a CISO who doesn't know the cutting edge of technology right now, but one who couldn't take half an hour to find out what a particular system is or pick up those skills quite quickly. It's not about memorizing everything. It's about being able to learn and develop those skills. And yes, I don't expect a CISO or someone in that sort of role to know absolutely everything, but to be able to learn enough of it to talk to the people working for them as roughly an equal. You don't need to go down to the depths of firewall configuration, but you should be able to talk, we should close down these ports. I would have some real concerns there. And just going back to what Chloe said about certs, I have noticed there's a new tendency. Certain certs now are going much more lab and scenario based, so they're bringing that play, that experience in, they're bringing that CTF type environment. There's blue team ones, there's full CTF type ones. And interestingly, those seem to be the most respected certs among people who actually do the roles, as opposed to the ones where it's pub trivia certifications.
Pub trivia, I like that. And so, I don't know, there are lots of pub trivia things, and there's lots of gold stars, and maybe it's how we've been trained at school. At school, you're trained to want the gold star, you want the certificate, you want the praise and whatever. It's natural, or maybe it's been taught to us, who knows. But what we do know is we love little certificates, and some people really don't tailor their CVs accordingly. You see a CV and it's got like a million short courses that lasted a day. We got a nice comment, Joe, you saw in the previous panel. James, I wish you could talk to a very hiring manager out there. You hit it right on the head with that, not memorizing, but about being able to find the answer quickly. Where do you think that play can sort of come into this? Because again, let's get back to this. With PlaySecure, we are proposing a better way of learning. So we should be able to sort of support that and say, right, play means, I don't know, capture the flags. Play means Dungeons and Dragons. or backdoors and breaches. Give us an example of play in this field.
I would say that there are plenty of ways how to team up with people. So like with CTFs, always ask ahead of time, can I do this with a team or can I do this with a partner? I think it's one of those things that we have to understand is when breaches occur, we have to have the best utter communication as possible. Not just that, it's also making sure that we're able to teamwork together and to really make sure that we're there to prevent something, but also that we can react quicker together. And so having games such as like Dungeons and Dragons with your security team is actually building teamwork. It's also helping us understand how we communicate and how we react to situations. That's why it's so important that we bring into, oh, there's a cat. It's so important for us to build into the way that we work together. And, it doesn't always have to be a security game. It could be a non-security game, but it's so important that we learn to play together as a team because it's going to be needed at some point.
And then conversely, let's reflect on bad games or bad gamification, mainly because as we discussed before, managed service providers are sometimes sitting out there thinking, where will my next meal ticket come from? Because maybe some revenue stream has been dwindling. So some of them have decided learning and development is going to be that meal ticket. And perhaps it has not been done as effectively as it could. James, describe to us perhaps bad gamification, so people can get a flavor. They'll know it's when they see it. But give us an example.
If all you're doing is sticking a scoreboard on normal training, that is bad gamification. Beyond that, if you're just doing tough challenges that only 1% of people playing can beat, that's bad gamification. It's not designed so that only the best people can beat it. You can have some of those challenges in there, that's absolutely fine, but everyone has to be achieving something. Everyone has to be actively seeing their improvement. Otherwise, it's not so much a game as just an incredibly frustrating hobby that people will give up, and they'll end up skipping the training or being ill that day or going somewhere else.
And Chloe, what are our next plans with the PlaySecure conference? Because obviously we'd love to, we're doing the yearly conference, but mid-year we want to do more awareness raising and more fun things. What do you think we're going to be planning?
Oh, I think because all of us are still in this pandemic and some of us have kids, that we may want our kids to attend a conference with us, of course, by our sides. I think that we see a future of more play, including the youngsters to come and join, but also having the evening program for just the adults. And that probably exists with it might be some pairing of nice beverages with certain talks to help get through the day.
And that wouldn't be too different to a lot of the work that you're doing, James, because obviously virtual events are valuable in their own right. So no matter if everyone goes fully back to an office, virtual events are very much here to stay. Can you tell us a bit about your work? And I know you host a lot on Gather, and I think that would be an interesting way to sort of also frame PlaySecure conference.
Yep. So I've got I would say a sideline, but it's almost a full-time job now alongside the other full-time jobs, running virtual events on the Gather platform. But that really does bring this aspect of play, and not just because it looks like a gaming platform. It gives people the chance to explore and network and bump into each other and bring the kids along. We have had people at some of these events just hand over the laptop to their kid, who then goes racing around, chasing off, absolutely out of control, but having a great time.
It is a bit more inclusive, and you avoid the uncanny valley, because there are people that say, oh well, the future is virtual reality. Maybe, but right now, the uncanny valley is something that really annoys people. And there's the cat again. Fantastic. And in fact, Chris has acknowledged that the MSS forum is a cat and dog friendly event, which is always good. Where do you think we could go with learning and development as a topic for the Managed Security Service series. Now, bear in mind, we are combining an MSS, MSP, and end customer audience. So sometimes I would imagine an MSS doesn't want to say something in front of the customer. Sometimes the customer doesn't want to say anything in front of their vendor. How can we gamify this all? Because this mustn't be a unique problem where people are afraid of letting something slip, especially in the security sphere. Attackers, they love sharing intel. We've heard defenders, bit more reticent. How do we overcome that, Chloé? Maybe.
Actually, I want James to answer this one first.
It's a tough one to answer. I mean, what you're describing is that fear of consequence again. So it needs to be some way to remove that from there. And if that's having some sort of cutout who sits in the middle and can just listen to both sides and then carry the message across with some degree of protection. So you can vent about your MSP or MSSP, or you can vent about your customer to an independent person or an independent group, or do it in some anonymized fashion so that it's not going to come back, it's not going to cause problems, but you can still get your concerns and get that mediation help to translate them across, as well as possibly someone say, actually, that's a really stupid vent. Have you considered this point of view? So removing consequence from it is a large part of that. I don't really have an easy answer there, aside from mediation of some kind. And as Christian has just said, anonymizing the customer, anonymizing the MSP and MSSP.
You kind of spoke my mind on that one. I have no further thoughts other than that.
Surely the backdoors and breaches game might help.
Oh, absolutely. It's a great game. Everyone should get it.
I agree with that. I also want to say there's a really strong hint in the word playbooks. So you have playbooks for instant response. Use them, play them through. Don't just use them when you have an instance. Sit down with customers, other stakeholders, and say, right, what happens if we have an incident like this? How do we play it through? What might the consequences be? What might go wrong at this point? D&D for security people.
Oh, I applaud that. That is so needed in so many ways. Not just that, but it helps us reduce the burnout, because we know that, okay, so this is what's going to happen when this happens. This is how it's going to go down. The other thing is, like, I always like to think of the metaphor of, I really like, there's a baking show that I really like, the Great British Bake Off. And in the previous season, there was this one baker, and she was amazing. Like, she was star baker, like every single week, like incredible baker. But then what happened was that during the finale, everything was going wrong for her, because the amount of stress and pressure to perform at that very height of the moment, it was hard for her to do what she normally does best. This is why it's always good to practice the playbook, because you never really know what the individual or team members are going to react when they're in the middle of a crisis. So that's why that playing thing is really important, because at least it gets absorbed in us. We have this memory of what goes down, but also we can help each other out as team members.
I'm just amazed that you've watched the Great British Bake Off. It's obviously very important watching, but I'm just amazed. It's shown over there. It's really good news. Chris says, Christian just touched on a question that popped into my head. How do you distinguish between TTX, tabletop exercises, and gamification, or do you?
I would. I don't think tabletop exercises, particularly if you're not doing them as the annual compliance thing where you just run through for 10 minutes and put the check mark in the box, but actually using them as a chance to explore possibilities and consequences, I'd say that's a game. That's play. That's not just gamification. You're not just bringing those game-like aspects into it. You are actually using it as a field for a game, as a board for a game, and you're running through that way. So it's completely open. It's not trying to build gamified aspects in, as you might do with some training, where you're adding achievements and varying challenges. You are just saying, let's play with this.
Inapplicable emotions is so important, because how are you expected? It's kind of like that whole idea. Okay, if I'm driving this car and I go this route, and I drive this amount of speed on the racetrack, I will outperform. It doesn't work like that. You actually have to get in the driver's seat and drive around. That's how you have better play and memory, is by making sure that you're also being stimulated more than just sitting at a table.
Absolutely. And in terms of spitballing, SOPs are not just SOPs, they are like play manuals, as James said. And all the conspiracy theories in the world out there, do you know what? They provide for great play exercise. What if aliens take over? Well, do you know what? Let's think about the business continuity plan for that. Whatever, it makes for a good game, and it gets people going. Yes, Chris says thanks, but we are now out of time. This is great. A conference within a conference within a conference. Total inception. And I'm pleased, do follow the PlaySecure links that Chloe and James have left in the Discord channel, because you're very welcome at the next edition. And this is great. This is global outreach. We're in San Diego on the Pacific coast, but we're also doing our PlaySecure, piece. From James and Chloe and myself, thank you very much.